There is a wall at the edge of the world, and a young man in black is freezing on top of it, watching the dark. You know him. That's Jon Snow's first night on the wall. The cold, the pointlessness, the question every man up there eventually asks. Why am I freezing here for people to the south who will never thank me? He gave up his name to stand on that ice. His family, his land, any future anyone would call a future, traded for a black cloak and a vow, to guard the realm against a north that everyone in the warm south has quietly agreed to stop thinking about. That's the Night's Watch. And here's the thing, George R.R. Martin will tell you himself, out loud. He did not invent it. He climbed a real wall in the north of England and stood there in the late afternoon and imagined a soldier from a warm country posted to that freezing edge, staring north into a land his empire could not conquer, not knowing what was out there, only that holding the line against it was his job. That soldier was real, and we even know some of their names, because they left their letters in the mud, and 1800 years later we dug them up. So I'm not going to tell you about the Night's Watch in the abstract. I'm going to tell you about one real man who lived it. Call him Candidus. This is Real Roots, the real history behind the stories you love. And today the Night's Watch and the real wall and the real man who froze on it. Hadrian's Wall. Let me take you to the actual edge of the world. Candidus is the real Jon Snow, except he isn't a lord's bastard with a special sword and a secret destiny. He's an ordinary soldier from somewhere warm and southern, and he has been sent to the very end of the Roman Empire. Picture what that empire is around the year 122. It is the superpower of the entire planet, stretching from the deserts of the Middle East to the cold Atlantic, and it has spent 100 years doing what empires do. Expanding, conquering, swallowing everything it can reach. It took the south of Britain easily, the warm part, the farmland, the towns, but the north would not break. Up in the highlands where tribes Rome could never pin down, fierce, fast, raiding down into Roman land, and vanishing back into the hills before the legions could catch them. This is the free folk. This is everything beyond the wall in the show, a people the mightiest army on earth simply could not beat. And so the emperor himself came to look at the problem. His name was Hadrian, and he was not a conqueror by nature. He was a man who knew when to stop. He looked at that endless, bloody, ungovernable northern frontier, and he made a decision that was almost un-Roman. He decided the empire had a limit. This far, he said, and no further. And to hold that line, he built a wall. Not a wall of magic ice. But understand the scale, because it is staggering. 73 miles of stone, coast to coast, across the narrowest neck of the island. Up to 15 feet high, 10 feet thick, with a deep ditch carved in front of it, and a fort roughly every single mile along its length. Tens of thousands of men hauling stone across the whole width of a country. It was the largest single structure in the entire Roman Empire, a monument, in stone, to one idea. The world has an edge, and this is it. We stop here. That's Castle Black and its brothers, stretched across the top of the map. And Candidus is one of the men sent to hold it. Why give your years to the coldest, loneliest posting in the world? In the show, the men take the black for life, and most of them didn't choose it. They were criminals, or bastards, or the unwanted. Candidus's bargain was a little different, but the shape is identical. He wasn't at first even a full Roman citizen. He was an auxiliary, a soldier drawn from the conquered edges of the empire. And the reward for his service, the thing waiting at the end if he survived the years, was citizenship. A name that meant something, a place in the realm, a chance to finally belong to the thing he was bleeding for. That's the Watch exactly. Men who volunteered to be forgotten, freezing at the edge of everything, for the promise of one day being remembered. And it is cold. That is the part the show gets right, and the part the mud proves beyond any doubt. Because remember Sam, remember the small human comforts, the letters, the little kindnesses that make the wall survivable. Here is the real version, and it is almost unbearably tender. At a fort on the wall called Vindolanda, buried in waterlogged earth that preserved them for nearly 2,000 years, archaeologists found hundreds of thin wooden tablets, covered in ink handwriting. The actual private letters of the actual people who lived on that wall. And when you read them, you realize the enemy up there, most days, was never a screaming horde. It was the cold, the wet, the waiting, because one of those letters is a shipment note sent to a soldier from someone back in the warm world, and it comes with a gift: socks, and sandals, and underwear. Somebody who loved a man on that wall knew exactly what the posting really was. Not glorious war, but endurance. Another tablet is a birthday party invitation, from one officer's wife to another. The oldest surviving writing in Latin by a woman's hand. A little flare of warmth and normal life at the frozen end of the world. These are not the words of legends. They are the words of cold, homesick people, counting the days. That is the Night's Watch, not the battles, the waiting. Men from somewhere warmer, sent to freeze, getting letters from home, guarding a line against a north that mostly just sat there being dark and cold and full of maybe. And Candidus waits, and he writes, and he stares north into fog, so thick he cannot see what's in it. Only that it is his job to hold the line against it. And sometimes, out of that fog, they come. In the show, the true terror beyond the wall is the dead, the White Walkers, an existential horror the comfortable South refuses to believe in until it's far too late. The real terror was human, but to a frightened soldier on that wall, staring into the mist, it was every bit as real. The Romans called them the Picts, the painted people, for the marks on their skin. They raided out of the fog and vanished. They were the people Rome could not conquer. The enemy so uncatchable that the greatest army in history gave up trying to beat them and chose instead to simply wall them out. The Picts aren't a perfect copy of the wildlings, and they're certainly not the dead. But the feeling is identical. A frontier, a wall, and beyond it something the Empire feared enough to stop advancing and start hiding. And here is a detail almost nobody knows, and it makes the parallel even sharper. Rome actually tried to push past Hadrian's wall. A later emperor advanced north and built a second wall deeper into the wild country, the Antonine Wall. They tried to expand the edge of the world, and they couldn't hold it. Within a generation, they gave up the second wall and fell back to Hadrian's. The empire reached north into the land beyond the wall, and the land beyond the wall pushed it back. Even Rome learned there was a place where the map simply stopped. So Candidus holds the line his own empire gave up crossing. For his whole term, and men like him held it, not for a year, not for 10. For nearly 300 years, generation after generation of cold, forgotten soldiers stood on that wall and watched the north. And then, this is the part that should stop you cold, because it is the truest parallel of all. The wall did not fall. It was abandoned. Because Rome, far to the south, began to rot. Not on the frontier, at the center. Civil wars, economic collapse, invasions on every other border. And one by one, the emperors began pulling soldiers off the edges to fight for survival in the middle. The men on the wall got fewer. The pay stopped coming. The forts began to empty. The comfortable, dying empire to the south simply stopped caring about the cold line at the edge of the world. Stopped sending men, stopped sending silver, stopped remembering it was ever there. Until one morning, the last soldiers just walked away. And the greatest structure the Roman Empire ever built was left standing empty in the wind, guarding a border that no longer meant anything to anyone. Read that again, and tell me it isn't the Night's Watch. A once mighty order dwindled to a handful of forgotten men defending a wall the warm kingdoms of the South have stopped believing matters. Right up until the moment they desperately need it, and find it nearly empty. Martin didn't just borrow the wall, he borrowed its ending. The real tragedy of Hadrian's Wall was never a battle. It was being forgotten. It was holding the line for 3 centuries, and having the people you protected forget you were ever there. And somewhere in that slow abandonment is Candidus. We don't know how his story ended. The letters only give us pieces. Maybe he earned his citizenship and went home to somewhere warm. Maybe he was one of the last, standing on cold stone as the forts went dark around him. But we know he was real. We know he froze at the edge of the world for the promise of a name. We know someone back home loved him enough to send him socks against the cold. So the next time you watch a man in black climb that ice in the dark, and you feel how alone he is, and how little the South understands what he's holding back, know that it really happened. 1800 years ago, real men from warm countries really did freeze at the edge of a real empire, staring north into a cold they could not conquer, writing home, waiting, guarding a line the world was already starting to forget. The ice is invented, the wall is not. And the loneliest job in fantasy was a real posting at the real end of the world. And the men who took it were real, and we know their names, because they wrote them down, and the mud remembered them long after the empire didn't. This has been Real Roots, the real history behind the stories you love. Next time, the Golden Lion of Lannister, the family that always pays its debts, and the real dynasty of bankers whose money bought kings, broke kingdoms, and ruled from behind every throne in Europe. Subscribe, and I'll dig them up.